There are many NAPLEX study strategies out there, but if I was an APPE student who was starting my studying now, here's exactly what I would do. By the way, this video is sponsored by TrueLearn, so as I go through examples of how to implement this strategy, I'm going to be doing so using their NAPLEX question bank. And if you're interested in getting access to it yourself, you can do so for 15% off when you use my code HAPPYPHARM. Also, make sure you stay until the end of this video because I'm going to walk you step by step through an example question. Okay, let's dive right in. So the first thing that I would do is review my rotation schedule, because you don't need to review all kinds of different material as you're going through your rotations, but rather focus in on the things that you're learning. So as you're going through these NAPLEX questions, you can tie it back to real life practical experience that you're getting on rotations. You can even do this ahead of time by mapping out what is most likely to be seen in a certain area. So if you're on ambulatory care rotation, you're likely going to see a lot of endocrine disorders and cardiovascular disorders. So I would look at those questions. If you're doing an internal medicine rotation, there's a ton of infectious diseases that come up during that rotation. And I would also look at renal disorders, because a lot of patients that are in internal medicine have some sort of renal dysfunction that you have to account for. If you do your community pharmacy rotation, then I would look at vaccines, and you're likely going to be doing patient counseling, so looking at questions that focus on patient counseling. Now that you know what topics that you need to study, the next step is to create a schedule based on your rotations of how you're going to study these topics using whatever study tools that you have. If you're using TrueLearn, you're going to do this by creating tests around those specific topics, and here's how you do that. From the home screen, you're going to click Create Test on the left-hand side of the screen. And once you're in the Create Test screen, you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom to the list of topics. You may need to click the Refine by Discipline button in order to see everything that you want. And then you can click the checkbox next to the topics you want to create a test over. Once you have them all selected, you can scroll back up to the top and you can change the title and the number of questions that you want to do for that week. This is where you get to decide if you want to do one big test a week and then review throughout, or if you want to do a bunch of smaller tests and just review those sections as you go. If you are doing multiple tests, you want to use a smaller number of questions, and then there's a checkbox next to the question state where you want to make sure new is checked so you don't get any repeat questions on those tests. I recommend bulk creating your tests, so that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it for all of your rotations at once, but maybe at least at the beginning of each rotation doing this process. And then I recommend naming the test the date that you would like to have that test completed on. That way when you go into TrueLearn later on and you're getting ready to take those exams, all you have to do is click on the date and go. Now once you have all the settings the way that you want it, then you're going to click the Start Test button. Now if you don't want to do the test right in that moment, you can click the button that says Save and Resume Test Later and come back to it on the date that you had named the test for. In addition to those topics, I recommend splitting up some time to do some calculation questions throughout your year, because these are questions that require a lot of repetition. So it doesn't matter if you've done this question before. What I want you to do when you do these questions is do them as frequently as you possibly can without burning yourself out, and do all of these calculation questions multiple times where you write out the equations and all of the test problems. Even if you know what the answer is, go through the steps and the motions to make sure you know how to get to that answer. And that you can do so extremely efficiently, because the calculations questions can take the most amount of time on your exam, and you don't want that to happen. So if you can make these questions go faster because you know exactly what to do and you know your equations and you don't have to think about it, then that's going to save you time on other questions that may be more in depth that you need to think through that are more clinical. So now you've finished your first exam. Congratulations, you missed a few questions. That's okay. What you can do is once your test is over, schedule out some time, whether it's the same day or a different day later in the week, to go over the answers to those questions. Not only should you review the questions that you answered incorrectly, but also review the questions that you weren't exactly sure on, and maybe you made an educated guess, so you can fully understand why the answer is what it is. Now once you have this plan in place, the great thing is you've done the hard work up front, so you just continue this process throughout your year. Now you may be thinking, but what about all those questions that I'm not going to probably hit on rotations, and what about my off blocks? Well, that is where you're going to fill in those extra sections and questions that you did not get to. Create tests to fill in those gaps, but don't forget to make sure that you have time off throughout your year. You still need breaks for things like mid-year and holidays, and just making sure you don't don't burn yourself out. I do recommend that you go through the entire test bank before graduation if you're following this study strategy. Now, the reason for this is you actually can't schedule your NAPLEX until after your graduation date. What you're required to get is something called an ATT, or an authorization to test. And once you get that authorization, then you're able to schedule your exam. And because the NAPLEX is such a long exam and it takes such a big block of time, most of the time there aren't exam dates right when you go in to schedule your exam, and you have to wait a week or two. And maybe more depending on how busy the area is. So in that time after graduation, after you've done all the questions, this is a great time for you to start reviewing. Go through all the questions that you missed and try to answer them again. There's a way to do this in the test section. I will show it here on the screen now, where you can go in and select in that question status the questions that you missed. In addition to reviewing those questions that you missed, this is also the time you want to be doing daily calculations. Don't just focus on the ones you missed here, but focus on all the calculations so you can run through and get really efficient at answering these questions. You want to make sure that you're practicing with either the calculator that's available to you in the TrueLearn testing window that is online, and you are also able to ask for a very basic calculator that only has the basic functions, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. I have found that using this calculator is the most efficient, so I would practice the questions that you can with that, and then use the scientific calculator for everything else. And while I recommend that you split up these questions that you missed into different sections, at some point during this time frame that you're practicing in between graduation and when you take the test, I recommend having at least one day where you have a test-like scenario, where you sit down and do 225 questions like you're doing the NAPLEX with the 2 10-minute breaks, so you can get the most realistic experience of what the NAPLEX test day will be like, even though you're not going to be in a testing center. Now, once you've done those questions that you missed and you reviewed the answers and see which questions you missed again, this really narrows down your focus of what topics are going to be the most difficult for you to answer on the NAPLEX and where you should focus your time and energy studying that material further. Now, there are a lot of ways you can review this. You could go back to your notes, you can go to textbooks, you can start trying to find videos on YouTube. You could even go straight to the guidelines. But if you're using TrueLearn, you can also connect that to Picmonic, and then you can watch the videos in Picmonic. They're actually linked to the questions that you missed, so you know exactly what videos you need to watch based on the questions that you continue to get wrong. Now, as time allows, you can continue to follow this process and re-review these materials and redo these quiz questions up until your test date. And that's really it. This is a method that allows you to spread out your study strategy throughout the year instead of cramming it all into one, and hopefully reduces your anxiety around test day because you are studying a long period of time, but not a lot at once. It also makes sure you're maximizing your time and not reading a bunch of material or looking over a lot of things that you really do know the answers to, but rather focusing in on the topics that are going to give you the most difficulty and that you are the least familiar with. Now, as promised, let me walk you through an example of how to think through a calculation question. So this question reads, what dosing weight in kilograms should be used for intravenous gentamicin for a 45-year-old man who is 69 inches tall and weighs 97 kilograms? Now, the first thing to look for in a dosing question like this is what medication are we dosing? Different medications use different dosing weights, and so you need to know, am I using an actual body weight, or is this something I'm going to need to calculate? In the case of gentamicin, you likely need to figure out if you need to calculate it. And the way to do that is to figure out if the patient is greater than 125% of the ideal body weight. So that's step number one. What is this patient's ideal body weight? We know that ideal body weight is different for men and women, so we need to make sure we're using the right ideal body weight calculation. In this case, for a male, it is 50 kilograms plus 2.3 kilograms for every inch over 5 feet. We know this patient is 69 inches and 60 inches equals 5 feet. So we're going to do 2.3 kilograms times 9, which is going to give us 20.7 kilograms. Add that to 50 for 70.7 kilograms for the ideal body weight. Now we know this patient is 97 kilograms. And so we need to know what percentage over the ideal body weight this patient is. There are a few different ways to do this, but my preferred method is to take the patient's actual weight, so 97 kilograms, and divide it by the ideal body weight, which is 70.7. This gives you 1.37, and if you multiply that by 100, you're going to get 137% of the ideal body weight, which is greater than 125%. This means we need to use the patient's adjusted body weight in order to dose gentamicin, which means you need to have another calculation memorized, which is the adjusted body weight. This is where you subtract the total body weight from the ideal body weight and multiply it by 0.4 and then add it back to the ideal body weight. So in this case, we'll start by taking 97 and subtract 70.7. This will give you 26.3. Multiply that by 0.4, which will give you 10.52. And then you're going to add that back to your ideal body weight, which is 70.7. This will give you 81.22. Now, if we go back to the question, this is extremely important, and an area where a lot of people mess up is, in order to get this question right, you have to make sure you round to the decimal point that is indicated in the question. In this case, it reads, answer must be numeric and round your answer to the nearest tenth. So in this case, the nearest tenth would be 81.2 kilograms. As you can see, this question is very complex and requires you to remember multiple different equations in order to get the answer. This is why I mentioned earlier, knowing those equations really well and doing a lot of practice with these questions can help, because if you didn't remember this exactly and you had to work through it a couple of different ways, it can be hard to come up with the answer. In addition to that, you can get open response questions like this, where you can't just guess your way or work your way backwards because you don't have the answer to begin with. In any case, when you start with a calculation question, before you start punching in numbers and doing the calculations, really read through the question and figure out what are they asking and what is the important components of this question, because sometimes they'll give you numbers that aren't necessarily going to help you or are needed for the calculations to get the result. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give this video a like down below so it can be shown to other students like you who are preparing for the NAPLEX. And don't forget to head over to TrueLearn.com and use my code HAPPYPHARM for 15% off their NAPLEX question bank. With that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!